Hi, I'm Jim Ward of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 50 in our History Bites series. Today we will discuss the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery forever in the United States. Despite the long history of slavery in the British colonies in North America and the continued existence of slavery in America until 1865, the amendment was the first explicit mention of the institution of slavery in the U.S. Constitution. While America's founding fathers enshrined the importance of liberty and equality in the nation's founding documents, including the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they conspicuously failed to mention slavery, which was legal in all colonies in 1776. Many of the founders themselves owned enslaved workers, and though they acknowledged that slavery was morally wrong, they effectively pushed the question of how to eradicate it to future generations of Americans. Thomas Jefferson, who left a particularly complex legacy regarding slavery, signed a law banning the importation of enslaved people from Africa in 1807. Still, the institution became ever more entrenched in American society and economy, particularly in the South. By 1861, when the Civil War broke out, more than 4 million people, nearly all of them of African descent, were enslaved in 15 southern and border states. Though Abraham Lincoln abhorred slavery as a moral evil, he also wavered over the course of his career on how to deal with the peculiar institution. But by 1862, he had become convinced that emancipating enslaved people in the South would help the Union crush the Confederate Rebellion and win the Civil War. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect in 1863, announced that all enslaved people held in the states then in rebellion against the United States shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. But the Emancipation Proclamation itself did not end slavery in the United States, as it only applied to the 11 Confederate states then at war against the Union, and only to the portion of those states not already under Union control. To make emancipation permanent would take a constitutional amendment abolishing the institution of slavery itself. The Emancipation Proclamation served as a catalyst for abolitionists in Congress to start working in earnest to end slavery in every state. It began on December 14, 1863, when House Republican James Ashley of Ohio introduced an amendment to ban slavery throughout the United States. Later that month, James Wilson of Iowa introduced another amendment calling for an end to slavery. Less than a month later, on January 11, 1864, Missouri Senator John Henderson, a member of the War Democrats who supported the Civil War and opposed the Copperheads and Peace Democrats, submitted a joint resolution also wanting an amendment to end slavery. In April 1864, the U.S. Senate passed the proposed amendment banning slavery with the necessary two-thirds majority. But the amendment faltered in the House of Representatives as more and more Democrats refused to support it, especially during an election year. As November approached, Lincoln's re-election looked far from assured, but Union military victories greatly helped his cause, and he ended up defeating his Democratic opponent, General George McClellan, by a resounding margin. When Congress reconvened in December 1864, the emboldened Republicans put a vote on the proposed amendment at the top of their agenda. More than any previous point in his presidency, Lincoln threw himself in the legislative process, inviting individual representatives to his office to discuss the amendment and putting pressure on border state unionists who had previously opposed it to change their position. Lincoln also authorized his allies to entice House members with plum positions and other inducements, reportedly telling them, quote, "I leave it to you to determine how it shall be done. But remember that I am the President of the United States, clothed with immense power, and I expect you to procure those votes." End quote. The year drew to a close with Lincoln's re-election, yet the House had failed to produce a bill abolishing slavery. Lincoln's patience with the House was reaching its end. At the same time, abolitionists declared his re-election as a mandate from the people to end slavery. More pressure was brought to bear on the holdouts in the House to pass the bill. Last-minute drama ensued when rumors started flying that Confederate peace commissioners were en route to Washington or already there, putting the future of the amendment in serious doubt. But Lincoln assured Congressman James Ashley, who had introduced the bill into the House, that no peace commissioners were in the city, and the vote went ahead. As it turned out, there were in fact Confederate representatives on their way to Union headquarters in Virginia. On February 3rd, Lincoln met them aboard the steamboat River Queen near Virginia's Fort Monroe in Hampton Roads, Virginia. Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, asked if there was any way to stop the war, and Lincoln replied that the only way was for those who were resisting the laws of the Union to cease that resistance. The delegation underestimated Lincoln's resolve to make the end of slavery a necessary condition for any peace. The president also insisted on immediate reunification and the laying down of Confederate arms before anything else was discussed. In short, the Union was in such an advantageous position that Lincoln did not need to concede any issues to the Confederates. Robert M.T. Hunter, a member of the delegation, commented that Lincoln was offering little except the unconditional surrender of the South. The meeting ended after 5 hours with no peace agreement. The war would rage on for another 2 months. The day finally came that the House was to vote on the amendment, January 31st, 1865. The House galleries, corridors, and lobbies were crowded to the doors. On the floor of the House were Chief Justice Chase and Associate Justices Swain, Miller, Nelson, and Field, Secretary William Pitt Featherston, Postmaster General William Dennison, senators by the dozen, the electoral messengers from Oregon, Nevada, and California, ex-Postmaster General Montgomery Blair, and hosts of other prominent people. Contemporary journalist Noah Brooks described the scene on the House floor as this, quote, "When the roll call was concluded, Speaker Colfax exercised his prerogative and asked the clerk to call his name, whereon his voice rang out with an aye. Then the record being made up, the Speaker, his voice trembling, said, 'On the passage of the joint resolution to amend the Constitution of the United States, the ayes have 119, the noes 56. The constitutional majority of 2/3 have voted in the affirmative. The joint resolution has passed.' For a moment, there was a pause of utter silence, as if the voices of the dense mass of spectators were choked by strong emotion. Then there was an explosion, a storm of cheers, the like of which probably no Congress of the United States ever heard before. Strong men embraced each other with tears. The galleries and aisles were bristling with standing cheering crowds. The air was stirred with a cloud of women's handkerchiefs waving and floating. Hands were shaking, men threw their arms about each other's necks, and cheer after cheer and burst after burst followed." End quote. The amendment as passed and ratified reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction." The House of Representatives passed the proposed amendment with a vote of 119 to 56, just over the required 2/3 majority. The following day, Lincoln approved a joint resolution of Congress submitting it to the state legislatures for ratification. But he would not see final ratification. Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, and the necessary number of states did not ratify the 13th Amendment until December 6th. 4 million men, women, and children were, as Lincoln declared in his Emancipation Proclamation 3 years prior, then, thenceforward, and forever free. Together with the 14th Amendment that afforded African Americans citizenship, due process, and equal rights under the law, and the 15th Amendment that gave African Americans the right to vote, a constitutional backbone was provided for what would become one of America's greatest revolutions, the Civil Rights Movement. We would like to thank you for joining us for today's episode, our 50th. We appreciate you taking some time to travel back in time with us through History Bites. We look forward to providing more educational and entertaining stories.